Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun-filled DIY video here about good old Athena. Over the last month and a half I've been working on spiffing up the engine compartment there, but let's head up, it's kind of cold out here. I've got my little kerosene heater on a timer so it's nice and warm in here. Anywho, up until now in my quest for a spiffy looking engine compartment, I've removed the engine, the sail drive and the old diesel tank, plus copious amounts of gawky yucky stuff and some rather questionable old sound insulation. Finally, a few days ago, I was able to apply the final coat of Sigma Dur 550 on the inside of the engine compartment. Ta-da! It's starting to look pretty good, but it kind of feels like there's something missing. Yep, nailed it. The fussy dice might be a little much, but I do think it's gonna look pretty awesome once I'm done in there. There is not a whole lot more I can do in the engine compartment until I've gotten my hands on the new diesel tank and until the weather has warmed up. But the timing isn't all bad because this weekend is the last weekend I'll have here aboard Athena before I go to spend 3 weeks with my girlfriend in sunny, warm Los Angeles. The goal for this weekend is to finalize the design of the new diesel tank, tie up some loose ends and tuck in Athena so that she's nice and comfortable while I'm overseas. Oh, and don't pay attention to that on the bulkhead over there. That's for next weekend's video that I've already recorded so that you guys won't have to go 3 weeks without a new video. Speaking of my upcoming trip to Los Angeles, Ava and I have finally managed to find a location for the meetup. So it's going to be on March 18 between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. at Golden Road Brewing. I'll include a link in the description below. Now, a lot of people have signed up, like a lot of people. So I think it's going to be a fun opportunity to meet some like-minded people. Oh, and Ava wanted me to mention that there's a little play area for kids there too. When I say a lot of people, I mean 115 have already signed up. How many of those are going to show up? I don't know, but it is a good chunk of people, and I wanted to make sure I put that out there so that you don't think it's going to be a crowd of 5 and show up and there's a bunch of people there. But I do think the meetup is going to be a lot of fun. Let's get back to the lovely looking prototype for the new diesel tank I built last weekend. Oh, and these 2 pieces of plywood here, we'll get back to those a little later in the video. As of recording this video, last weekend's video has just shy of 700 comments. I guess diesel tanks is kind of a hot topic. I've read through all of the comments, and in this video I'm going to touch on some of the concerns you guys had and some of the major themes. Let's check out what the Bible has to say about this topic. This is Boatowners Mechanical and Electrical Manual. This is by far the best DIY boat book I have ever found, and I'll include links in the description for this. The only downside to this being a book is that Control or Command F doesn't really work all that well, so I spent a bit of time last night sifting through it. This is basically what I want to do. I just want to have a box with some diesel inside of it. But there are some nuances to this apparently. So in this drawing there's a sump here, and I saw quite a few comments recommending I put in a sump. That's an area where debris and water can gather, and you can then pump it out from there so that it doesn't get sucked up into the engine. My tank doesn't have a sump, but it has something I think is going to be just as good, and that is a low spot, this forward corner here. This is the shape of my tank, and I'm just going to pretend that this area down here is a sump. By not having a real sump in the tank, it's going to be a lot easier to install and a lot easier, aka cheaper, to build. Going back to the book, they've got a fuel suction line that extends deep down into the sump. In my tank, that suction line is going to be for the fuel polisher. The next noteworthy thing on this drawing are the baffles. Now the book suggests baffles be placed every 75 centimeters or 30 inches. My tank isn't that big, but like my buddy from the marina pointed out, the baffles also help to stiffen up the tank a bit. Like I showed you in last weekend's video, on my tank I'll have 2 baffles, one going in this direction and one going in this direction. That is a little bit overkill, at least according to the book, but I like it. One of the comments I saw pop up more than once was a suggestion that I should put in a drain plug in the bottom of the tank. I'm not going to do that because I'd like all of the connections to be on top of the tank to minimize the risk of leaks. And remember, the pickup tube for the fuel polisher will basically serve the same purpose. The book also covers the pros and cons of various materials when it comes to tank building, because there is no perfect one material to build a tank out of. Stainless steel is covered, aluminum is covered, I think also mild steel is covered, and various types of plastics. The author seems to be quite fond of fiberglass tanks, which is certainly an interesting topic because, well, you can build them yourself, you can build them to all kinds of shapes, but he also mentions that fiberglass tanks are maybe not the best for fuel. The reason being that nowadays it's not uncommon to add ethanol to the diesel, and ethanol is known to break down resins. Now you can still build fiberglass fuel tanks, and I am going to do that here aboard Athena, only not for this tank, and that's a topic we're going to come back to in the future. Having gone over the pros and cons for all the materials mentioned in the book, for this tank, I am very much tempted to stick with stainless steel, 316L to be exact. The L stands for low carbon. The author argues that you should stick with 316L or 317L, and that although these materials are more expensive up front, throughout the lifetime of the tank, that added corrosion resistance will pay for itself. Like I've mentioned, I really like this book. I think it is by far the best DIY boat book I've ever come across, and I think every boat should have a copy of this lying around. The book covers a wide array of topics, amongst them tank building, and I'm not claiming that book is the one and only truth out there, and nor am I claiming that the tank I'm going to put in Athena is going to be the world's best tank, because all tanks end up being some kind of a compromise, and what I'm doing here aboard Athena is just one way to go. It's not the only way to go. I think that covers the majority of the themes in the comments on the last video. There are still another 2 or 3 themes I want to touch on quickly tomorrow, but for now I'm going to head back to Obelix and take Jirkul for a long walk. Good morning, guys. It is Saturday morning, and look what was waiting for me at the hotel in the marina this morning. An exciting looking box. As you might already have noticed, I've gone ahead and replaced the tarp that's covering the cabin top. But before I leave for LA, I also want to go ahead and remove the tarp that's covering the cockpit. And this box has something to do with that. I want to remove my ghetto looking cockpit enclosure because I'm pretty sure it's not going to survive another storm, and I don't want it flapping around while I'm not here. But I do think I'm going to leave the frame in place because that might come in useful when I get back. Yes, I know, not terribly exciting, but in life, not every package can contain a new exciting tool. Some of them just contain hose. Well, hose and some hose clamps. This is for the drains in the cockpit. Remember, a few weeks back I removed the old hose to be able to paint the inside of the engine compartment. And to not have the boat completely filled with water when I get back from the US, I better make sure the cockpit drains overboard instead of, well, inboard. This is some pretty nice quality hose. I guess temporarily I could just have put back the old crusty ones, but where would the fun be in that? Just like the old hoses, I'm gonna have the new ones crisscross the rudder tube so that this one here gets connected to the cockpit drain up here. Ta-da! Something like this. Now I really like this solution because there are no sharp bends in the hose, there are no 90-degree fittings or other weird stuff that's gonna clog. This is a nice, simple solution. Just imagine the entire cockpit locker all white and spiffy and with some kind of grate or false bottom to cover up the hoses. It's gonna be awesome. Now that the cockpit once again drains through the appropriate holes, I can go ahead and remove the tarp. And just like that, she actually looks like a boat again. I've gone ahead and tidied up just a tiny bit here inside the boat and also outside of the boat, just in case the yard wants to move around some of the other boats. I don't want my junk to get in the way. Let's get back to everybody's favorite topic, diesel tanks. Here I've got 2 pieces of the old diesel tank. This is from the side of it, and this is the old inspection port or hatch. The old tank was constructed out of 1mm thick stainless steel. I think for the new one, I'm gonna go with either 1.5 or 2mm. Of course, that also depends on what the place that's going to build the tank recommends, but I don't think going with either 1.5 or 2 millimeters is going to be a complete waste of money. I like the idea of beefing it up just a tiny bit. Like I mentioned yesterday, there are a few more themes from last weekend's video's comments I want to cover. One of them was a recommendation that I should use fuel manifolds instead of having a bunch of connections to the tank. It's definitely not uncommon to have return and supply manifolds in a fuel system, but I think in my case, sure, I could cut away maybe 3 connections to the tank here, 3 or 4, but I don't really know where to put the manifold, and I think this is just simpler. That is to say, it's simpler for now at least. I don't know what's going to happen once I add the rest of the tanks here aboard the boat, but in case I want to put in the manifolds at some point, I can simply just plug up all of the holes I don't need on the tank. Last weekend I got all excited about stainless steel tubing or pipes coming down the sides and looking all spiffy, but there were some comments pointing out that all of these joints are potential weak spots when it comes to leaks from vibrations, so I think I'm just gonna go back to the not so spiffy flexible fuel hoses. I'm no expert, so I don't know if leaks would develop in those connections, but I do know if they developed in there, it would be very difficult to get at them. So yeah, I better just err on the side of caution and go with the not so spiffy solution. When it comes to securing this tank, I'm going to go with the same approach that was used on the old tank, and that's to weld on some little tabs, have holes drilled through those, and then through bolt those to various parts of the engine compartment. So back here would be the little shelf. The one that's here would go through the side of the engine compartment, and then I'm thinking about adding one down here that would bolt through the support for the forward part of the tank. All that remains now is for me to figure out the layout on the top of the tank here, and that's very difficult for me for some reason. There were a few comments suggesting that I should get all the connections on the tank put on a piece of stainless that's then bolted onto the tank. That way, in case I ever need an extra connection put in or some kind of modification, I can unbolt this piece, take it to a metal shop, and then just bring it back home when they're done. That is an awesome idea and something I certainly want to integrate into this tank design. Okay, so a lot has changed here, but that's okay. That's why we've got prototypes. Gone are the 2 inspection ports. Instead, now I've got these 2 stainless steel plates here with connections on them, threaded connections. This is the forward end of the tank, and here I've got the fuel polisher pickup, the engine pickup, and a pickup for the reflex stove's day tank. Also, right here is the ultrasonic tank level monitor. The return from the engine and the return from the fuel polisher are now both located on the aft end of the tank. There were a few comments that mentioned that that was a good idea. Back here is also the fuel transfer, the vent, and the deck fill. I've offset this center baffle here slightly towards starboard. That way, these pickups here are roughly in the center of the tank. As you can see, I've got plenty of room for additional threaded connections on this plate. So I think I'm just going to add a few just to future-proof this a little bit straight out of the gate. I'm sure the astute of you are screaming at your screens right now, because how on earth am I going to access this part of the tank over here if there's a baffle here and another one here? Well, the only solution I've been able to come up with is if you remove this and you poke your hand in here, you'll get access to this area, but then there'll be a hole in the baffle here that you can sort of snake your hand in through. I think that'll work out okay. In last weekend's video, I mentioned a focus tube for the ultrasonic tank level monitor I'm going to put in the tank. And wouldn't you know it, I've got one of those focus tubes right here. This gets shoved into the tank, cut off about 1 inch above the bottom of the tank, and then the sensor goes on top of this, and that helps, well, focus the sensor. We'll get back to the benefits of having a focus tube like this one and also the sensor itself once I've gotten the real tank and I can actually test out this stuff. For now, I just wanted to make sure that this wouldn't interfere with my layout. Looking at this, I see absolutely no reason why this focus tube should interfere with anything here. Oh, and if you're curious, this apparently is called an SAE 5-bolt pattern, and I believe it's an automotive standard. There is a somewhat silly thing about that standard, and that's the fact that this gasket, for instance, only fits one way. So if you rotate this one hole to the right or the left, the holes won't line up. I guess that makes sense in certain applications, but for me it means that I have to figure out the orientation of this before I order the tank. And I think I want it like that. I'm excited to see what you guys think about this, and judging by the last video, a lot of you will have opinions about this. So go ahead and share your opinion down below. But, depending on the feedback I get from you guys, I could get this drawn up and sent out for quotes in a couple of days. That way, hopefully I won't have to wait for too long for the new diesel tank to show up when I get back from the US. And who knows, perhaps the weather will have warmed up a little bit so that I can finish the engine compartment. And there's not a lot left for me to do in here. All I have to do is to glass in the support for the diesel tank, paint, put up some sound insulation, maybe some LED lights, and that's gonna be it. In last weekend's video, I showed you guys these two pieces of plywood, but I think I forgot to mention what they were for. Down here along the hull, there are some rather big holes from old cables and stuff, and I wanted to hide those because the sound insulation is only going to extend down to this edge here. So I cut two pieces of plywood that will simply just get screwed into this. I know you could still see those big holes when looking down, but remember, that edge is going to get covered up by sound insulation, so I think that's going to work out okay. And I also think that was about it for my notes for this video, so I guess I should head back to Obelix and start packing. Like I mentioned, next weekend's video is already pre-recorded, but after that, it is going to get a little bit silent on my end for a couple of weeks. Of course, I am super excited to go see Ava, but I'm also excited to get back home to Athena and continue the refit. Now, if only I could do both at the same time. But yeah, I guess that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!